All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Melville Kashan. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator at Sexual Health Alliance. And today we have with us Sandra T. Jones. Sandra, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Sandra T. Jones. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've got a private practice that treats people in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. And I've worked for many years and been a member for many years of the consensual non-monogamy community, also the LGBTQ, kink BDSM community. And I've written a book on communication skills to help us out in consensual non-monogamy.
Yes, wonderful. Well, we are so happy to have you here today. And throughout the LinkedIn Live, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I have another window open. I'm going to be checking the chat as we go. And even if you're not joining us live and you have questions, you can go ahead and post them and a member of our team will answer them for you. So if somebody is brand new and they don't know what is consensual non-monogamy, could you give a brief explanation? Like, what is that?
Sure. So we live in a culture that's primarily monogamous or advocates monogamy, which means in our romantic or sexual relationships, we're expected to commit to only being involved with one person at a time. Whether that's in dating or in some sort of legal arrangement like marriage, we're expected to only have a sexual or romantic relationship with one person at a time. So to have an involvement with another person has traditionally been considered cheating. Consensual non-monogamy means that we have a consensual agreement among all the parties involved that it's okay to have multiple relationships, whether that involves sexuality or affection or love or romance, and that multiple relationships are not only acceptable, but good.
Yes, wonderful. That was a great explanation. We did a LinkedIn Live with Jen Ronner the other day, and she was talking about like tips for like successful consensual non-monogamy relationships. And one thing she said is communication. Like communication needs to be top tier. And so I'm really glad that we're going to talk about the importance of communication today. So I'll pass it off to you. Go ahead and like tell us about why is communication so important, and clear and kind communication important.
Communication is like one of the most important skills for consensual non-monogamy, and one of the reasons for that is when you're living in the more traditional framework, you can make a lot of assumptions about what's expected of you, what's expected of your partner, what everyone expects of each other. And so with consensual non-monogamy, as we're creating new things and stepping outside the quote norms, we need to communicate about each and every one of these so-called assumptions and make sure that everyone consents to what is expected of them or what they want to have expected of them. And also consensual non-monogamy can really bring up some intense emotions for people. And those intense emotions can either make or break relationships. And so to be able to talk about our feelings and what our needs are in those contexts is very important to repairing any possible ruptures that may happen in the bonds of relationships. So it's really important to be able to communicate, not just to communicate, but to communicate well. And so that's why I've put together a book of communication skills, because in doing years and years of relationship counseling, I've found that we live in a culture that really doesn't teach us how to communicate in a healthy way, especially about our feelings. So most of the time when people think they're communicating their feelings, they're really not talking about their feelings. They're talking about their thoughts, their opinions, their judgments, or they're trying to push on another person what they think is, quote, right or wrong. And all of those things can do a lot of damage to the bonds in our relationships and to people feeling safe in our relationships. So to have better communication skills, to actually learn how to talk about our feelings, and then how to know when, if I'm having painful feelings about something, when are my feelings my responsibility to do inner growth work, and when are my feelings the responsibility of my partner because they've overstepped or they've done something damaging. And so that is a whole section of the book as well. So if you don't mind if I just keep going on, talking about our feelings, talking about our feelings is like like I said a second ago, most of the time people are talking about their thoughts, their opinions, and their judgments. And as soon as we start like judging something, the other person often feels attacked. So, when you might find someone trying to communicate about their feelings, they'll say, I feel like you didn't treat me very well.
Yeah.
And that's a judgment on the other person's behavior. And there's no emotion word in there. There's no emotion word you would find on a feelings chart, Yeah. So the first skill that I try to teach people is nonviolent communication, which is, was a technique invented by someone named, I forget his first name. His last name was Rosenberg. It has to do with removing judgments from what we're saying and just describing what we see. Like, when you stay out past 10, I feel, and then you follow it up with I feel. So instead of saying, you stayed out past 10, you said you were going to be home at 10, what you did was wrong, and I'm upset about that. There's a whole lot of you statements there, and the other person's going to feel attacked, even if what the first person is saying is completely true. The second person is still going to feel attacked, and so we tend to automatically respond defensively, and then you have an argument, right? So instead, we want to remove those you statements and put in the I statements of I feel. But it's just the observational thing with no judgment. When you walked in the door at 10:30, I felt distressed, or I felt angry, or I felt hurt, or I had been feeling anxious for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So
it's more like digging a little deeper, into like what you were actually feeling at that moment.
Yeah. And by phrasing it as the I feel, we're leaving the door open for, I might need to take responsibility for my feelings, and the other person may or may not be responsible for my feelings. But it doesn't automatically put the other person on the defensive. So that's the first step. Those are the first two steps of nonviolent communication. And the second two steps have to do with expressing our needs and asking for what we want. But I bypass that and I teach people the imago exercise, which is a much more detailed exercise where one person speaks and the other person listens, and you need to take your own agenda and set it aside, because your job is to really try to understand the other person, what they're feeling and why, even though their feelings don't currently make sense to you, accepting that their feelings make sense to them. And your job is to figure out how and why their feelings make sense to them. And then you trade places. So both people get a chance to really express their feelings in a non-judgmental format, and then brainstorm solutions that work for both people.
Yeah. And what are some things like in consensual non-monogamous relationships? Like, what are some common themes that you see that couples have trouble with, whether it's like communication or different issues, things like that?
A lot of the common issues really come down to the deeper meanings that people put on things like how we allocate time, how we allocate attention. And there's a lot of deeper attachment issues that can often get triggered in these things. And so as a psychotherapist, digging in for each individual about what is their life history, what is their attachment style, and that informs a lot of why they're having the emotional response they're having, which is not necessarily caused by their partner as much as it is caused by the combination of their partner's actions and the meaning they put on it because of their past relationship histories or their attachment style from childhood.
Yeah.
So taking those things into account and just trying to focusing on those communication skills. Another thing that I've noticed is people often don't realize that in most arguments, there's really two arguments happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And we can get distracted by the surface level argument, So like if a person is feeling distressed because, let's say, your partner's got a new partner, a new bright shiny partner, and they're like getting all into NRE, and you're not feeling like the bright shiny focus anymore, and you're starting to feel hurt by that. What we tend to do is we may put pressure on ourselves to not feel that way or to not consciously feel that way because we're trying to be good at non-monogamy. But it starts to come out sideways in other ways. Like, you didn't do the dishes yesterday and I had to do all the housework, and the dog had a groomer appointment and you didn't tell me. You're not communicating with me the way you used to. And so those little things are where it starts to come out sideways, right? And what I teach people is to try and notice that there's a surface level argument that we can be too distracted by. Who did the dishes yesterday, right?
Yeah.
We want to get to the next level below that, which is the emotion level argument. What are you feeling? I'm feeling frustrated. And the more that you start to dig into that, they'll start coming up with more and more examples of how the other person's not doing the same thing because they're trying to create a pattern. And as soon as you notice that people are trying to point out, this is a pattern of behavior that the other person is doing that's causing me to feel this way. Now we can focus in on what is that feeling and what does it really mean to you? Let's dig deeper, right? So we can often dispense with the surface level argument most of the time. Sometimes we still need to solve that surface level argument, but that deeper argument has much more to do with the pattern of emotions, feeling appreciated and recognized, feeling that the bond in the relationship is strong, and learning to talk about our feelings in a way that creates greater connection and depth and strengthens that bond, rather than talking about our emotions in a way that is divisive and just hurts each other more and creates a bigger and bigger division.
Yeah. And that's such a good point, because I know, like, even in my own relationship, like I have a monogamous relationship. It's just me and my husband. And like, I notice, like, there's usually layers to conflict, you know? So like you were saying with the dishes, like, you know, it could be that like I, you know, did the dishes when he usually does the dishes, but then I was irritated about something else. And then there's lots, like an onion, lots of layers going on.
Sorry, we've got a lot of pollen in Atlanta right now, and it's just like the struggle is real.
Yeah, spring is in full bloom. We have layers of pollen covering like tables, cars, all of that.
Yeah, it's like a yellow snow everywhere.
Exactly.
Okay, so I apologize for all the coughing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those layers, you know, when we get down to those deeper levels of what we're feeling, learning to communicate about those feelings in a way that actually brings the relationship closer together rather than causing greater division is like super important skills. And what tends to create that division is when we start in with those judgments. I feel this painful, uncomfortable feeling. It started when my partner did this behavior. This is like, you know, imagine this is what's going on in your head. It started when my partner did this behavior. Therefore, this behavior my partner did is bad because it caused me to feel bad. There's the judgments. And my partner is bad for having done it.
Yeah.
And that's a very simplified version of how we tend to approach these things in this culture. And so if you start there, then we tend to attack the other person. You did this thing, it made me feel bad. You should correct it and apologize to me, right? Now, the partner is like, whoa, wait a minute. And so they immediately move to defend themselves. And a discussion starts to look like two lawyers in a courtroom where they're just sort of arguing their side. And as this person tries to argue their side and this person responds defensively, this person doesn't feel heard, right? So they repeat themselves, sometimes louder, giving more examples because they don't feel heard.
Yeah.
Well, this person heard you. They're just not responding to what you're saying because they want to explain themselves. And when you don't respond to that, they don't feel heard. So they're going to repeat themselves again, sometimes louder, sometimes with more examples. And, you know, now you've just got an argument.
Right.
So what the Imago exercise teaches us to do is to not do this sort of adversarial approach to a conversation. It's not one person's going to win the argument, one person's going to lose the argument, one person's going to be right, one person's going to be wrong. Anytime one person is made wrong, I shouldn't say anytime, but much of the time, if one person is made wrong in a relationship conflict, the bond in the relationship is going to be damaged. So what we want to do is bring these two people back together as a team and see the rupture or the rupture to the bond. That's the common enemy.
Yeah.
These two people are a team. They're trying to figure out how to correct that together. That's what we want. So
I love that. I think too, our society is so competitive sometimes that we always feel like there has to be a winner, there has to be a loser, you know, and you don't realize that, hey, the two of you are on the same team and it's you against the conflict versus, you know, versus there has to be a winner, there has to be a loser. I have to come out on top.
Right. Right. And a lot of people feel like they're being controlled or manipulated by the other person if they don't come out on top and win. And a lot of times, you know, especially if that's a primary focus is not the word I'm looking for. If that's their primary approach to these sorts of disagreements, that often goes back to a childhood trauma. If you had a very manipulative or controlling caregiver when you were a child, and you learned that you learned somewhere along the way that you were being gaslit or manipulated, then you're very defensive in those sorts of moments. And so that's, you know, my therapist brain pops in and says, that might be some individual work that a person needs to do with an individual therapist. If I'm doing relationship counseling with, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 people, then I'm not going to necessarily go there other than to help them see it and then recommend that they start work with an individual therapist, because those childhood traumas, they really do come in and impact our current romantic and sexual relationships.
Yeah, and that's such a good point too. I think a lot of people don't think about doing individual therapy when, you know, there's a relationship issue. They think, oh, we have to do this as a couple. We have to do everything as a couple or as, you know, with our partners. But really, there can be a lot of individual work that needs to be done too.
So that kind of gives me a good segue into something I call the personal responsibility flowchart in my book. And it's, let's say that the people involved in the argument have gone through the nonviolent communication steps. They've gone through the Imago exercise steps. At the end of the Imago exercise, when each person supposedly really sees and understands the other person's perspective and they've really validated their feelings, they're supposed to brainstorm solutions, right? Solutions that meet the needs of all the people involved, right? Which can be challenging, but usually people can do that unless they get stuck on something like one person believes they have a right to something that they don't actually have a right to. Like one person thinks they have a right to control curfew time for their partner's dates, let's say. And so they're not going to be able to brainstorm solutions that work for both of them if one of them is saying, I'm feeling overly controlled by this and I don't want a curfew, and the other person says, well, but I can't go to sleep unless you're here and I need to go to sleep by 10:30, so you need to be home by 10:30, right?
Yeah.
So you got a situation like that where they're not able to brainstorm solutions that work for everyone. Now we need a tool to help us understand when is change the responsibility of ourselves and when is it the responsibility of a partner. So this flow chart basically starts with we need an understanding of each person's basic human rights in relationships. And so there's a whole section of the book on what I think of as these 13 very important basic human rights that are non-negotiable that everyone has in a relationship, so that we know, you know, what we have a right to control and what the other person does not have a right to control. So the first one is full bodily and sexual autonomy, to give you an idea of what some of them looks like, you know, to be spoken to respectfully and treated with dignity. It's those kinds of things, right? So you have your basic human rights, and then an understanding of when we create relationship agreements, we are consensually negotiating away an iteration of one of those rights. So you could think of monogamy as a relationship agreement, that I have full bodily and sexual autonomy, but if I'm choosing to engage consensually in a monogamous relationship, I am agreeing to not exercise this one iteration of my full bodily and sexual autonomy. I am agreeing that you can trust me. I am not going to go out and have sexual contact with other people. I retain all my other rights. I can say no to sex with my partner anytime I want, right? I'm not saying, you know, I'm your property. I'm here for you to use as you wish. There are definitely relationships where people negotiate that, and as long as it's consensual, that's good and wonderful, right?
Yeah.
But it needs to be consensual and consciously negotiated and agreed to. So, so then relationship agreements are agreements to negotiate away expressions of those rights, right? So then if you and I are having that that imago exercise, and we're coming to a disagreement about whether or not I have the right to control when I come home from a date, or you have the right to control when I come home from a date. First, we're going to look at my basic human rights. Do I have a right to control that? And so one of the rights that I've listed is you have a right to control your time and do with it what you wish and spend time with the people you want to. So then if we say, okay, so I have a right to control this, the next step is, did I negotiate that away in a relationship agreement? And if the answer is no, I never actually agreed to come home at 10:30, then if you're upset about that, that's your work to do, right?
Right.
But if I did negotiate it away, the difference between rights and agreements in this case is that rights are non-negotiable. I always have them. But relationship agreements can always come back and be renegotiated. So maybe I did negotiate that away at one point and I agreed to come home at 10:30, but now it's not working for me. I may owe my partner an apology if I just took it upon myself to not come home until midnight one night and make them worry, right? So I violated a relationship agreement. I definitely owe them an apology. I need to take responsibility for that. But now I can say, but that's no longer working for me, and I need us to renegotiate that. And I always have the right to come back and renegotiate a relationship agreement. They may not like it. They may be upset by it, but I still have the right to control my time. So we need to be able to negotiate or renegotiate that agreement because it's no longer working for me.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I love like the relationship, like the rights that you have in a relationship. Like I want to like print that out and put that on the wall for my kids. Like, so they know like ahead of time,
Yeah.
like you have, you know, just because you're in a relationship doesn't mean that the other person, you know, has the right to control you. And these discussions need to be had, you know, about, you know, what is okay, what is not okay, you know, like you were mentioning, what are you like kind of like signing away, like, you know, as part of this relationship. And then knowing that you can always go back because you have that right as a human to decide what type of relationship you want to be in and what is comfortable for you and what is not. And you can always go back and change things.
Yeah, I also find that this tool is very helpful for the clients that I have that really struggle with creating and enforcing their own personal boundaries, whether it's with coworkers or friends or their parents or, you know, or the people that they're involved in romantic relationships with. And so a lot of people will get so uncomfortable and feel like they're being selfish if they try to have a boundary, or if they do try to have a boundary and their partner or whoever it is they're interacting with gives them any pushback at all, then they're like, oh, I'm a bad person for trying to have this boundary. Yeah. And we need boundaries in order to have healthy self-esteem and self-respect. If we don't have boundaries, then our self-esteem and self-respect gets really damaged. So I try to explain it to people as like boundaries are like, you know, those stone fences that people used to have around their farmland, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So boundaries are like that. And you need those fences to keep certain things in and to keep certain things out. But we put gates in those fences so that we can allow in what we choose to let in and keep out what we choose to keep out. And there are people who will see your fence and they will run headlong into that stone fence and say, oh, you're hurting me with this boundary. Why is this boundary here? This boundary shouldn't be here. Take this boundary down. And I apologize. I realize I'm doing that pretty hard and I hope I'm not upsetting anyone. But it's like if I have a boundary around like something very obvious, like it's not okay for anybody to touch me without my permission.
Yeah.
And somebody else says, you're hurting me with this boundary. It makes me feel unwanted. It makes me feel undesired. You shouldn't have this boundary with me. You know, and I'm like, oh, am I a bad person? Do I have sexual hangups because I won't let this person touch me whenever they want? No, I have a right to this. And so the personal responsibility flow chart also helps us to see when we have the right to have boundaries without feeling guilty at all. And, you know, because you can't tell by whether or not other people are giving you pushback. They'll give you pushback because maybe they have unhealthy ideas of what they have a right to. You know, that's not necessarily a reflection on whether or not I have a right to that boundary. So people are not always going to be happy, even if you're doing things in a very healthy way. fact, a lot of people will be unhappy about that. It's really important to have tools to be able to see when I have a right to something, so that I can then go, well, if I'm feeling guilty about that, maybe that's my work to do. I need to work on, why do I feel guilty about that?
Yeah. So what would you recommend? We have like 5 minutes left, and I'm thinking if somebody is new to consensual non-monogamy, maybe they're thinking about maybe having another partner join their relationship, or they're just thinking about being the one to join another partner. So what are some tips that you would give someone if they're first getting into a CNM relationship?
Well, the very first thing, I'm assuming they're already in one committed relationship from the way you phrase the question. So the very first thing is for the two people who are already in a committed relationship to very thoroughly talk out why it is they're doing this, what are the benefits that they perceive will happen, what are the possible roadblocks or emotional struggles that they may come up against, and of course reading the classic material out there like Ethical Slut, or that's the one that's popping to mind at the moment. The 101 books, right? But to just really, as thoroughly as possible, look into that before they start bringing in another person, because that other person is a real person with feelings and needs and wants, and they don't necessarily want to be the person you're experimenting on and harming in the process, right? So the next thing that I think many people find helpful is to sort of do pretend dates. Like, don't actually start dating another person, start doing things separately, so that I'm assuming that they're talking about dating separately instead of dating together. There's a lot of ways people can do CNM. Some people do swinging, which they're going to do a lot of what they're doing together. Some people are looking to date together. But I was thinking specifically about the people who might be looking to date separately. Go ahead and do some of that without actually dating first. Get involved in hobbies and friendship groups that you do things separately, so you get used to not doing everything together. And then just at some point, lots of talking and check-ins as you start taking those independent steps, or you start dating and bringing in other people. Lots of emotional processing. Even if you're seeing another couple together, or you're seeing another individual together, you've got to be able to process what you were feeling each step of the way. Certain moments that may have been challenging, certain moments that may have been lots of fun and wonderful. Having those communication skills to be able to talk through all of that. And of course, always keeping in mind that the other people are full human beings with needs, and you shouldn't be making decisions that impact them without including them somehow in that conversation. They're not your plaything.
Right.
And a lot of couples very new to consensual non-monogamy will talk about things together to protect their primary bond, and forget to include that third or fourth person in some way in those conversations, or at least asking them if they want to be included in those conversations. If that additional person was looking for something casual, then they may not want to be included in these deep emotional communications, but at least ask them,
Yeah. So another thing before we go, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about your book?
Oh, sure. Here it is.
Yeah.
Cultivating Connection, a practical guide for personal and relationship growth in ethical non-monogamy. And it's more of a 201 book. It's not about what is CNM and how to do it and how to get into it. It's more about, now you're in it, how do you do that deep emotional communication work? And how do you foster a healthy you as an individual, and also healthy, deep emotional bonds? So there it is.
Love it. And if somebody wants to buy it, where can they find it?
You can find it on my website. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's a few local bookstores here in Atlanta that carry physical copies, but and I think there's one in South Carolina, Queer Haven Books, that's going to have physical copies. But otherwise, it's mostly the online retailers or my website.
Awesome. And I will drop a link to your website in the comments after we're done with the video. I'll put some resources and things in there now. And so you will be talking at Sexual Health Alliance's event this coming weekend. So, and your topic is on communication, correct?
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna teach the details of those skills we talked about: the nonviolent communication, imago, and the personal responsibility flowchart.
Wonderful. It's going to be a really great event. We have a lot of great speakers coming. So if anybody's watching and you're interested in getting a ticket, you can go to our website, sexualhealthalliance.com. The title of the event is called Monogamish. And so you can find that under the events tab. I'll also drop a link below. There's still tickets available. Like I said, it's this weekend, so it's Saturday and Sunday. And yeah, we would love to see some of you there.
Great. Thanks for having me today.
Yes, thank you so much. This was like so enlightening. There's so many things you said that I really liked, and I think, even though I'm not in a CNM relationship, I think there's lots of things I can apply to my own relationship too. So this was amazing.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right. So I don't see any questions popping up. I've got another window open, so I've been checking, and I don't see any questions yet. But like I said at the beginning, if somebody has a question, you can still drop it in after the live is over, and we can come back, and somebody from the Sexual Health Alliance team will get your question answered. All right. So with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you again, Sander, and we'll end the live now.
All right. Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome.